Hey guys, Pawnce here with another all-time sponsored video. Currently our only of one of the four Heavenly Kings that supports this channel with $100 a month via Patreon. So thank you very much for your continued incredible generous support of the stream and the YouTube programming. Helping us stay full-time here, so appreciate that greatly. Now, in terms of what we're actually doing this month, you guys might remember the first video I did was in regards to this. It was a general question about me and sort of my experience with writing. Turns out we have sort of a common interest in that. He himself is a writer as well. However, unlike me, he is actively working on a piece of literature, at least one anyway, outside of his typical day jobs. He's a very busy man by the sounds of it. So he asked if I would be willing to do kind of a reading for it. I just sort of, look it over and do it for the video. So yeah, he sent me the file and I read over it, and fortunately it was actually really good and entertaining. I liked it. So we didn't have to have that awkward conversation about, like, why I didn't want to do it. So it all works out perfectly. So I figured I'd do my, since I do a number of voices for my stream, we do the fake British narration accent voice. Since kind of like I'm the narrator here. So anyway, hope you guys enjoy that. I'm not super familiar with stuff from like this specific subgenre, but to me it kind of had a very strong sort of Conan-ish vibe to it. So Conan the Barbarian kind of thing. So yeah, anyway, like I said, I had fun looking it over. So now we're actually going to read it over with we're going to ruin his literature with the fake British accent narrator voice. Hope you guys enjoy. Duran was moving with a small troop out in the field. It was unusually cold, and the grass was all rotted, yellow and rough to the touch. You could almost sand down the hardest of steels on it. Everyone was keen to get back home. It was bad hunting weather, but direct orders from Stoichko had them all out here scouting. It was a precaution that had to be taken every night, to scout for monsters and other tribes. Junior hunters would normally go out in groups of 2, and sometimes took trainees with them. But the daily hunt earlier in the day was weak, and Stoichko needed to send out his best to find out where all the game was. The plains were dominated by the Trembor species because of their mostly grass-based diets and love of sun, and due to their usefulness and rich source of meat, all stayed around their environment for as long as they could get away with. Duran was leading the group with Aldra at his side, Poldo behind him, and 2 junior hunters tagging along for the experience. Today, Poldo whispered to Aldra. Aldra hushed him sharply. The group navigated the fields to where the last sighting of the local Trembor herd was, and looked around for evidence of anything that could explain where they were. Sir, Poldo whispered. It's not me, Aldra responded. This looks like something you would do, sir. Go away, Aldra barked. Duran looked up and frowned at the 2 of them. Something wrong, Al? He queried. We were just discussing how odd this all is. No obvious signs of migration, Aldra remarked. You're right, Duran admitted. The only real explanation is if they were spooked and started stampeding towards Canyonland again. Poldo tapped Aldra on the shoulder, which he was intentionally ignoring. Or something else, Aldra began, before Poldo's constant tapping began to annoy him. Stop it, Poldo! He barked again, before a hail of rocks were thrown at them. One of the juniors was chiseled right against his chin, sending him into a daze immediately, and cracking his jaw. As he fell to the ground, his friend ran over to him and tried to drag him behind the nearest rock formation. Aldra and Duran were able to dodge most of the pot shots, and Poldo only took a few in the body. All of them ran for cover. Duran was able to avoid getting hit. Aldra had only been nicked, ripping up a bit of his clothing. Poldo concluded that he had sustained no serious damage. Who do you think? He asked meekly. Darks, Aldra huffed. In the name of the Catalyst, cease this at once, Duran shouted over the hill. Over it, a group of dark warriors paced, each with a loaded sling in hand, save for the lone figure up front. Standing almost 7 feet tall, with the face of a wolf sprawled across his chest and the mighty flag that flew proudly above his head. It wasn't just any dark warrior. It was the dark wolf who approached. The man carried only a jagged blade with a long handle in his offhand. Designed for two-handed use, it looked no bigger than a dagger when he held it. "Who comes before me?" he called out. "I am Duran of the Halls," Duran called back. "Duran of the Halls?" Raynor looked at his followers, who each shrugged. "Never heard of him." "I have heard of your exploits, Dark Wolf. We wish no combat," Duran begged. Alder frowned at him. "Weak," he muttered under his breath. The dark forces moved to encircle the halls, picking up any small stones they could find while doing so. "These are dark lands, Duran. I cannot let this invasion go unpunished." Paused. "If you come out, I'll let you off lightly." Raynor slowly approached the rock formation where they all hid. "No lands are dark lands, Wolf. These are Preacher lands, always have been," Duran said, trying his best to assert himself. "Well then, perhaps it will come here to defend its lands," Raynor growled. Poldo looked for his knife, then made eye contact with Aldra, who drew his own leaf blade, its edge reflecting in the light and blinding Duran a little. He placed his hand over the surface of the leaf blade and looked down on Aldra. It had been reported on many occasions by the independent traders who would come to the tribes from time to time that there was a man fitting Reynold's description who would go about bullying smaller tribes, and that nobody could stand up to his might. Duran knew for a fact that Aldra had heard these stories too, but failed to accept them as truth. Unfortunately, even though he was in charge of the operation, the juniors had no say in the matter, and Poldo would always side with Aldra, leaving him at a 2-to-1 disadvantage. "Come out," Raynor ordered. Duran looked Aldra dead in the eye and motioned for him to stay put. He then rose from his cover, holding his hands out to either side. "Fancy sword you got there, Duran," said Raynor. "I'd bet it's pretty old," referring to the short sword Duran carried on his side. "We got one like it back at camp, same horned guard and all. I'd never forget it." "A sword's a sword, Wolf," said Duran. "Reynold's the name," he corrected. "And that's the lightning blade." "Never heard of it," Duran responded. "Well, you need not worry about it any more. It's mine now." Looking down at his blade, he recalled all the times he had used it and what it meant to his family. His unborn child would be the next to carry it, not some thug he met only a moment ago. He considered their odds in a fight with Raynor. One of the juniors was in no shape to fight, and the other wouldn't last a second against the wolf. Poldo himself would most likely struggle. "Aldra may be the only one I can trust to hold his own," Duran thought to himself. Then suddenly Aldra leapt from behind a rock and slashed one of Reynor's slingers, cutting him down where he stood. Another tried to draw his blade on Aldra, but he was stabbed in the neck by Poldo before he could unsheath. "I was hoping you wouldn't make it easy," Raynor encouraged. "You're next," Aldra exclaimed, before charging in recklessly, Poldo following behind him. They both swung their blades at Raynor, aiming high, but were stopped short. Raynor caught Aldra's blade with his own, and stopped Poldo's toothpick of a weapon with his bare hands. "Ha!" Raynor bellowed, his voice building with excitement. Clutching Poldo's hand, he threw him across the field and punched Aldra square in the face, sending him back a few feet. He tried to bounce back and take another swipe, but was kicked in the stomach, pushing him onto his back. Raynor paced about, waiting for his next challenger. Although he had found his feet, Poldo was hesitant to run back in. Normally, for Aldra's sake, he would be all in without a second thought, but in the presence of the Dark Wolf, things were very different. This man had not even bothered putting down his flag, and the gigantic grin further conveyed he was not taking this fight seriously. Clutching his stomach, Aldra was out for the count. It became apparent to Duran that it was his turn next. Nobody else was in a hurry, and Raynor was growing anxious. "Let us leave, and I won't mention it to the clan elders," Duran bargained. "Ha, ha, ha!" Raynor bellowed. He removed the strap holding the flag to his back, and spiked the pointed end into the ground. "I hope you put up a better fight than those two," Raynor giggled. Letting out a bated sigh, Duran gave in and drew his sword. Part of him regretted not running in when Aldra and Poldo had, but it all happened too quick, and all he really wanted was to avoid a fight with the self-proclaimed greatest brawler across all three tribes. Taking position, sword out in front of him, Duran ran in, and the two of them clashed blades. Duran wasn't a master swordsman, no Hahl hunter was, but he had basic training in the form of sword fighting that favored quick, precise attacks and strong defense. He would block a slash, then attempt to respond with a quick stab. However, he never truly had a good chance to be offensive. Reynold would take big swipes with his weapons, the equivalent of haymakers while wielding swords. This normally wouldn't be a problem if he wasn't swinging real haymakers as well. Reynold was no sword fighter. He had no form. He was all aggression, and he was so big and strong he could get away with it. Duran had run away from a lot of his attacks, and every time he did, his opponent would laugh harder and chase after him. It was all part of a plan to make him mess up somewhere. All Duran needed was a moment's lapse to cut him open. "I think I found it," he thought to himself, spinning around and slashing his blade to catch Reynold right across his beloved wolf tattoo. His sword was down, and he had nothing else but bare skin to protect him. "Damn, I really should cut this handle down," Reynold complained, for he had jabbed himself with the back end of the wood. Duran was shocked to see his attack hadn't landed, but instead Reynold had caught the sword in his weapon's crossguard. The angle of them, coupled with their narrowness, were enough that if you hit them, you were stuck there. Reynold smashed Duran in the face, then ripped his sword from his hands, throwing both their weapons to the ground. He staggered backwards and heard the sound of cracking knuckles before he was whacked again and again until he was sprawled across the ground, face swelling up enough that he could no longer see clearly from his eyes. Reynold continued to bellow with laughter as he went to pick up and separate the two blades. He then approached Duran, ready to finish him off. Duran looked up through his blurred vision and awaited his demise. A shadow was cast over him, and a blade hung over his head. "Wait!" Poldo screamed. Reynold stopped giggling. "Huh? For what?" he said, confused, before shaking his head and turning back to Duran. As he was about to finish him off, despite Poldo's protests, someone small had crashed into him, plunging a knife into his shoulder and holding their weight against it. "Ah!" Reynold screeched in agony as he flailed and stuttered about. "Get off me!" He reached around his head, grabbing the junior hunter that had mounted him like an animal. He threw the smaller adversary over his shoulder, ripping the knife out in the process. Poldo started sprinting over to help as quickly as he could. When the junior hunter hit the ground, Reynold grabbed him around the neck and snapped it like it was some loose bit of bark, killing him instantly. His body slumped lifelessly, and his knife slipped from his fingers. Before Poldo could stab Reynold in any way, he was punched in the face, knocking him unconscious. Teeth gritted, his wound leaking blood, the dark wolf whined and struggled over to his things. Scavenging his sword, Duran's pilfered weapon, and the flag, he ran away with them all held in his arms. As Reynold took off running, Duran's consciousness faded from him, and there he lay until Aldra found his feet. "The Dark's mightiest warrior," Aldra mumbled to himself.